Welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to be talking about how to structure a company properly to achieve service success. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today Madhu Karnani Oza, who is the Director of Customer and Technical Services for Asia Pacific at Abbott. Madhu, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. All right. So to kick us off, let's have you tell the listeners a bit about yourself, anything you want to share about your background and your role at Abbott.
Okay. So currently I am the Director of Technical Services for electrophysiology business at Abbott for Asia Pacific. I'm based out of Singapore. So currently we're responsible for all technical remote services, field services, professional services provided post sales. Most of my career I've spent within this company, really within St. Jude, which was bought over by Abbott, in various roles in product development, and then over to telehealth operations. And that was when I was based in California. So we're based here in Singapore, loving it, and have three children. Between that and work and everything, we're pretty busy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Similar here. And you had shared that you were born in India, and then you went to, was it graduate school in the States?
That's right. University of Wisconsin, Madison.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And then you took the role in Singapore. And the reason I mentioned that is because when you and I connected and we started talking about, some of the trends in service and sort of the evolution of product companies towards servitization and things like that, it was interesting because we could kind of talk about those viewpoints from almost a regional level and sort of the differences in where folks are at in that journey. So as we talked about that, one of the things that came up in conversation is the topic we're going to tackle today, which is as a company looks to embrace service more as a strategic differentiator, as a path to revenue growth, what does that look like, operationally? Like, where does service reside in the org structure to have, the best chance at success? And this is something that comes up these days in a lot of my conversations. Because people are, struggling with different aspects, trying to figure out what is the best, situation for their business. And so I wanted to start by saying there really isn't one answer, right? Like it's going to be individualized, based on each person's situation. And, it could even evolve over time. Mm-hmm. But I know it's something that you had some opinions on based on your experience. So I thought it would be really interesting. So before we talk about some of the choices, some of the pros and cons, et cetera, talk a little bit about like why this is such an important topic, like why it's top of mind for you, why it's top of mind for a lot of other people in service roles.
Yeah. So basically, if you think about it, when there was a time when companies, product companies were product companies, and I think in the last couple of decades, various sectors have sort of moved towards using service as either as a differentiator or, as you said, a revenue generator. Mm-hmm. And the fact that companies are sort of going through that change means that now there's something new, something that's traditionally not very well known, and that's why I think and different companies then have different approaches. A lot of them are not very deliberate approaches, right? Because it's something new; it just sort of happens. And I think that once it happens, and then you're moving through the phases of growth, that's when you start to realize, wait a minute, why is it like this? Should another way. So I think it's a lot of it is just growing pains. The other reason I think it's also important to talk about this is because, I talk to several people about this because it's a dilemma, right, in a lot of our minds. And so I talk to people about it. And it's amazing to me how when people are giving you their response, they give it to you like it's so obvious. But yet all of them have such different views. So I've talked to people who are just like, oh, that's a no-brainer, it belongs here or it belongs there. And so I think because of that, like this is, I think, one of those conversations that people should have, that it's for some reason obvious in a lot of minds, but they're very, very different answers in minds. So I think that's why this is important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the first piece of advice then, which you said, is it's not always deliberate. So companies can kind of start on a path and then find themselves where, okay, well, here we are, and here's how we've set things up, and now we're just kind of, forging ahead. If a company were wanting to be more deliberate, right? What are some of the considerations? What's your best advice for how to be a little bit more strategic and a little bit more deliberate in setting some goals to determine what the best structure is?
Yeah, so I think as you said, I mean, I really think this is one of those things that people need to be deliberate about. And it's okay that I think things have evolved how they have evolved. That's totally natural, right? I mean, you have something new, it sticks somewhere. But I don't think it needs to be the answer forever. And I think services are very unique because it has a very highly operational aspect to it, but also extremely customer facing. And so it's in a very unique situation as to where it is. And so I think that's why people really need to be, I think, deliberate about this decision. So I think that, the first thing to do, I think, is for leadership, management, leadership, visionaries to sort of step back, take a think, have discussions, agree, and then the last piece, which is communicate. So I think this is one of those discussions that I think needs to be happening deliberately. Step back, look at sort of what is the goal of services in your organization. What is its impact to your business? What is, how much of your business is service going to be dependent on? And there are direct dependencies like direct revenue, but there are a lot of indirect dependencies like what pull through it's going to have for your product, for example, right? Or is it, is it going to be generating goodwill for your company and thereby have some really indirect impact to your business? I think first of all, it's important for companies to sit back, step back and think through, what is the goal of services for your company at that point of time. I do say it does evolve, and this is a conversation that needs to be had honestly every few years, depending on how service is changing as part of your business. So that's what I would say is, first of all, step back, think about it, have your opinions and whatnot, but then come together, discuss, come to an agreement. Now, I can't emphasize enough on the communication piece of it. So, when you have, so I do think that a lot of this comes top down, right? I think a lot of these decisions, these discussions, etc., they start top down, and they must. But I also don't think that working in silos is a good idea. So you have some sort of definition, up top. I think it's very important to start trickling that information down. Being able to get some of your key people to provide their opinions, because you're sitting up here, but unless you know what's happening in the real world, your decisions are not going to be fully informed. And that last piece of, before it's absolutely set in stone, to communicate up and down, and ensure you have all those points of view. I think that would be very, very key. And I think during those discussions itself, I think certain obvious answers may even present themselves to you by having these conversations, not just amongst the leadership team, but also with customers and with, your people who are actually on the ground. So that's one thing. And I think that also helps to build culture. And again, cannot emphasize enough how important it is to build culture. A lot of our companies are extremely large, right? A lot of it is consolidation and shared resources and so on, multiple businesses and so on. But it is truly important to set that culture of not only are we thinking this through, we're talking to you, we want to know what you're thinking, and our decision is going to be an informed one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a couple really good points in there. I mean, the one thing is, like you said, it can evolve, right? So the path you choose isn't necessarily set in stone. You can always evolve and pivot. One of our recent podcast guests headed up service transformation at Gia, the food manufacturer. And she actually talked a lot about, it was about a 10-year trajectory and how it started as like a pretty small focused team looking at what is the service opportunity. And then it evolved into sort of a formalized group. And then eventually, as it caught on, it was infiltrated into the business at large to where it isn't its own entity. It's just sort of, blended in. So, that's a good point. I think the other thing is, depending on the industry and depending on the goals of the business, some companies have an objective to really truly become service providers. So even if they do manufacture a product, it's almost going to be part of the service, right? And that is the path. And for others, it's just an area of the business that maybe they want to grow and expand on, but not necessarily, all the way to that point. And so having some idea of where you want to get to, I think, while you're not setting it in stone, having an idea of where you ultimately want to land also prohibits you from taking steps that are going to waste time and energy and effort and resources, right? And the communication part is key. The other thing I've seen is situations where the desire to really emphasize service or expand service is not coming from the top down. It's coming from service. And then it's just, that's a very frustrating spot for the person that sees the opportunity, but is in a silo and doesn't have the ability to really, influence to the degree they want, the outcome. So, okay. Very good points. So let's talk about, we'll get into some hypotheticals, I guess. So let's talk about, as a company is considering how to structure, we in our previous chat identified 3 main options. Okay, so let's talk through those and then talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each, in your opinion. So the first is commercial. So structuring within commercial.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I think before we get into those pros and cons, it is very important to clarify that whether the service organization resides within operations or commercial or whatever you decide on, having a separate entity with its own leadership, meaning service as an organization with its own leadership, I think is first of all incredibly important. So wherever it resides, in whatever I'm about to say in terms of pros and cons, there's no doubt that there needs to be a separate leadership. With focus on service.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, also that you need something like a service excellence organization, service transformation, whatever you might call them. The people are not on the ground providing the operational service, but sort of the people in the background who are looking at how to improve it, how to roll out new services and new tools and things like that. So to me, first of all, that's a given. So I don't want that to be in any doubt whatsoever. That's absolutely necessary. But having said that, having formed this organization now, the question is, where do they fit in a company? And so that's why you said, as we said, the first potential answer would be, for example, commercial, right? So let's say, so first of all, I think, this is something I do a lot, which is that, service is about, the main thing that service is about is service. It's customer service. And, in an interview, I will often ask people, in every interview, I will ask people, what do you think, this job is about, or what's the main, goal, or what have you. And if the word customer service is not part of that answer, that's usually an end of that interview. Because you've got to understand that whatever your end goal, whether it is to generate goodwill or generate pull-through or to generate revenue, it doesn't matter. It is all very customer-centric. So keeping that in mind, that service is all about that customer. You've got to have a team structure that enables the company, the employees of the company that interact with the customer, to be one team, to appear as one team, to not appear fragmented, to not have separate goals or be working in silos. So if I am, a customer, and if I hear, so let's say it's my telephone, right? Let's say it's my cell phone, and I'm talking to two representatives, and one who's trying to sell me something, and another who's trying to fix my problem. And if I feel like those guys haven't talked to each other, or they have separate goals, they're pushing their own separate agendas on me, that's not great customer service. And that's a very simplistic consumer type of example. But I think it applies to anybody out there, whether they're dealing with large capital manufacturing equipment, or large medical equipment, or diagnostics equipment. It doesn't matter. They don't want to have these large companies pushing on two different fronts. Able to provide that one single face of customer first, customer most important, whether you're selling something or you're supporting something. I think it's very important. And I think that being part is for service being a part of commercial, I think facilitates that. Because now you've both got the same goals, you're being sort of led top down by the same leadership, same organization. I think it just makes it a lot easier to have that one team, one face kind of approach to the customer. I think that's absolutely the biggest pro of having service be a part of commercial. Now, I will put in the disclaimer here that some of this is also culturally made harder. So, for example, I think in some countries I have seen where in an organization where service is not part of commercial, that it actually works okay. Because they're used to, sort of collaborating with each other, and the customer sees no issues, they don't see any kind of separation or anything. So it does happen. But I think, when you start thinking about it, I'm more sensitive to this, having worked on different continents, is that, there are cultures where there's a lot of hierarchy within an organization. If that hierarchy is such that one of those, either the service guy or the sales guy, if one of those feels more powerful or acts more powerful than the other, which happens a lot, then that's going to tilt that sort of one face approach again. And it's not that easy at that point of time. At that point of time, you need that organizational structure, the organizational goal to allow both of those people to have the same voice with the to be able to collaborate, and not for one of them to dominate the other. This is honestly just everyday stuff that happens at companies at various levels, right? So I do think that culture makes a difference as well. So whenever I talk to people from some of the countries that my peers in other regions will say, "Oh yeah, but we've never seen that problem because the two people, the two organizations still work very hand in hand."
Mm-hmm.
And I agree, that's true, but it does make it harder in some cultures and so on. So so anyway, so yes, so that's a big part of it is the pro in this part for commercial. Now, the other big piece is hello P&L, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how all business decisions are made. You have the revenue piece, you have the cost piece, and boy, looking at them separately is not a good idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
One without the other. So when you're making business decisions, where should you put resources? Where should you provide, better tools, or maybe a new tool, or where should you go to innovate, right? You've always got to look at both sides of that. But when commercial is sort of separate from service, one's looking at the revenue, the other's looking at cost, then conversation just isn't a complete conversation. Again, it can be done, right? I mean, I can sit here, look at both sides, but I can be siloed in one team.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the same thing.
Right.
I mean, a very simple example would be like if you're deciding whether to buy, let's say, a new or fund a project that would aid in a decision-making tool. Okay. In terms of cost, an operations team is going to think about, what's the cost effectiveness of that? By adding this tool, am I going to save headcount somehow? Remove manual work and thereby save headcount. That's going to be their focus of it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if that tool facilitates decision making, there's no easy way to quantify what that's going to bring in terms of revenue, because you don't. But eventually it should, right? And that's kind of conversation that needs to be had when you look at both sides of that coin. I think that's what is facilitated when you have, I think, service and commercial sort of working as part of an organization.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about cons?
Yeah. So that you have to think about a little bit. I do think there are a couple of things. There are cons to this as well. So one thing would be that there's and depending on your industry, depending on the customer, there are times when you hear the customer really likes their service guy because the service guy isn't trying to sell them anything. And so I think some of that may become blurry if the service and commercial lines are not well drawn, if the responsibilities and roles are not well separated. Suddenly if the customer feels like everyone in this company is just pushing and peddling for something, we don't want that to occur either, right? High trust factor. So somehow you do need to make sure that even if service and commercial are one organization, that there is that empathy and that trust that you continue to grow with the customer and not appear salesy to everybody.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's really it in terms of the cons of that approach in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So the second choice would be within operations.
Yeah. So with operations, and I certainly think that again, it's about the phase at which you are. When you're trying to operationalize something new, right? I think operations are very good at that. Getting the team together, the right people, the right processes. Process is very, very, very big in service. Right. And that is something that I think operations teams, their thought process is very well suited for. Mm-hmm. When you're an immature organization, it makes sense to get that help with operationalizing something new. And I've certainly seen that be very, very successful. I think secondly, the other big plus point of being under operations is that, As you know, operations is very good at efficiency, productivity, KPIs, and then running with those numbers and being very, very good about not digressing, staying on that track. And so that discipline, I think, is just very high in an operations team. And that naturally works well, for services, right? Whether you have a field team or whether you have, a remote support team, or you have both, just having those specific KPIs and running through and never letting your eyes off of that, because boy, your bonus is tied to that 0.2% deviation. I think that makes a very big difference, and it does help the operational side of services in a big way. I think the other thing also is that depending again on your business, being able to tie back to capital management processes, which is usually an operations process, manufacturing and operations and distribution process. Just being able to tie back with that, because so much of what service does in a capital organization is capital movement. That's where the cost honestly comes in, right? Depending on your product and your organization. But usually a big part of services is parts. And the exchange of parts, the repair of parts, and all that ties in very well, with operations. Another very big plus point of being part of operations, and I've seen those, sort of both of these factors really come into play very personally as well. On the con side of the operations piece is that, like we mentioned, you're a separate team from commercial and sales, but you're both very customer facing. And now that difference in goals, difference in mindset, make it harder for you to have that one face of the company kind of, customer service, that one brilliant experience that doesn't feel like it's fragmented. That piece. And then of course the fact that, again, if you're very focused on cost only as part of operations, then I think you miss out on some of that innovation that you have in creating a new revenue stream. Then your focus is so wholly on staying within KPIs that the innovative spirit sort of is left up to someone else, and either side is kind of really looking at that piece. So yeah, I do think that's another con of the whole thing.
I think that's the biggest one. I mean, honestly, right? Because it's, right now, to me at least, that's where the industry is at, is that innovation. Customers want different things. How do we meet those needs? We have different opportunities to deliver, adjacent, complementary, advanced services. How do we position ourselves to do that? And if, to me, if you don't sort out how to work that innovation in, become very stagnant. I think it's just the pace of evolution is so fast right now within services that if you don't prioritize that innovation, you're gonna have some trouble.
And I mean that's directly tied into right now what we're seeing in the world, which is this digitalization.
Right.
I mean, which has been accelerated by COVID, but it, honestly, it was very much a need of the hour, even before 2020. And so, as you say, then there's no one sort of thinking of both sides and being able to say, I want to provide this other service or a better service or be on a digital platform and by, increase throughput or efficiency or just customer satisfaction and ease and so on. And so, then it's like then your service organization just becomes like, hey, look, I've just got a job to do, and my is to meet these KPIs, and that's that. Now, I mean, that may be an oversimplification of things, but honestly, this stuff makes a huge difference in the culture and the mindset. So if the top-down vision does not include that innovation, being able to think outside the box and to be able to take very calculated risks then then progress will be incremental only. It will not be, making a big jump of progress. I think gets very difficult.
Right, particularly when you think about when you think about service in operations, what comes to mind for me is a lot of so as you said, it's been driven historically by efficiency, productivity, cut costs, minimize headcount, all of those perceptions. And I think part of the impact of that, and then also just generationally with the workforce, is this is what we do, that's just, it's show up, do your job. They don't necessarily think out of the box. They're not in any way inclined or incentivized to bring new ideas to the table. They probably, and I'm overgeneralizing, but I'm just saying in terms of some of the drawbacks, there are probably many not interested in really expanding soft skills and customer facing, traits, and they just want to show up with the toolbox and fix what they're fixing. Exactly. And move on, right? So that's another exactly. I think the innovation thing and the evolving the thinking, evolving the culture, you really have to get out of that, operations mindset. I mean, you need it, but you have to, like you said, be able to marry the two worlds together, strike the right balance, those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the mindset thing, I think is big. As you said, if your job and your goal is to get in there, get your stuff done, and get out, and that's that. And you're driven by KPIs of like, hey, how much time do you spend over there at the site? Like, okay, let's minimize that and so on. The culture of customer relationships is generally a more commercial concept than an operational concept.
Right.
And while again, as I said, I mean, absolutely things can be done, irrespective of where you belong. But boy, culture is top driven, and it permeates through whatever group you're in. And I think the other aspect of that is that not only is it difficult to create that culture of innovation and customer service excellence and so on, there's also the fact that the talent that you attract and the talent that you retain can also be impacted by that culture.
Mm-hmm.
So the people, the people you kind of attract and then retain are the ones who like that sort of operational, productivity driven, efficiency driven, kind of work.
Right.
I think that it has a ripple effect. It's not just your culture today; it's your culture for in the future as well. It does. Yeah.
And when you talked earlier about communication, right? One of the things I think about is in that operational culture. Even if you have a vision at the top for this innovation, you can communicate that vision, but the goal isn't to drive compliance. The goal is to drive commitment to that, right? And so if you don't have the people that have the right frame of mind, personality type, inclination, incentives too. But I mean, it does come down to, there's some people that have always been doing, have been doing that operational role for a long time that really, they don't want to sell, or they don't want to be a trusted advisor, or they don't want to have a consultative relationship with the customer. And, those are some of the things. And this is why it's an evolution, not boom, let's make this happen, right? Because when you really start digging into the layers, those are the things you come up against, right? I mean, you can't just have some, super cool, fresh thinking, upper management that comes in and is like, here's what we're going to do. And, you can have the best change management strategy, but if you don't have the right people, at best, they're going to comply. and you're not going to have the customer impact you want by just compliance, so then it becomes a longer game of seeding the right talent and thinking about, how you want things to be in 2, 3, 5 years. And, it's really cool stuff, but I say that because I talk to people about it, not actually do it, which is a little bit different. All right. So the third option would be to have this as a totally separate entity. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this one I will say I have less experience in, and whether firsthand or even further degrees removed. But I think that the biggest pro of for having a completely separate entity, I think would be the ability to make change really fast.
Mm-hmm.
You want to develop something, a new service and a new model, and new everything, then you do get that that freedom to be sort of like your own entity, be more entrepreneurial, be fast, be agile. I think if you have that sort of, if you're that autonomous, surely I think that the ability to make that change can be very quick. And so I do think that there's something to be said about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, going back to what we were saying, it's about where you are in that journey, right? And what's for your company, what are you developing, how quick you need it to be, what's that vision? And based on all of that, there may be situations where you want it to be a completely separate entity, which is, just running, doing its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that that's definitely a possibility. Also, if service is going to be a very massive part of what you're doing, then of course that I think again deserves its own entity as well, perhaps, right? So I think those would be the reasons for being separate. But really, it's all about that driving a very big change in a very short time. That's I think you need to have. You need to be autonomous to that level.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you kind of get the disadvantages of both the earlier, options we talked about, right? So you have the disadvantage of kind of, okay, you don't really have, KPI-driven operational discipline in that case, nor, again, you go right back to the fact that, is your commercial group different and you're separated, and then how do you provide that one face, one name kind of, customer support. So you do still have those same challenges to deal as a separate entity. But again, as I said, if it's large enough, if it's a big enough proportion of of the business, then then absolutely it does make sense at that level, especially if you want to innovate really fast.
Right. I think the other consideration here, though, is, and obviously it would vary company to company, but what does the customer journey look like? Because I think this also poses the biggest risk of not providing a consistent, cohesive experience, right? It kind of has, to me, that's another big point of consideration.
Exactly. But I do think that, the way you would think about it is that, there's a company that is, that just needs to make some innovation and really, really quick, they don't have the time or whatever, then I think it could be a good intermediate step.
Yeah. Almost like an incubator.
It is exactly.
Right. And that's exactly, yes. Yeah. That's sort of how the woman I referenced earlier from Gia, that's sort of how that started. And then, she basically said, like, it almost went through these stages, and then it became where there's, a chief service officer in each function. Mm-hmm. So they're responsible for driving the innovation, all of those things, but it's really integrated into the business. But it started out as sort of a separate small team.
Exactly.
That was just, driving it forward. Yep. So
exactly,
as we said earlier, it could certainly evolve, and it very well may. But I think that there's some good points that you've brought up for people to think through and consider and kind of weigh, because to your point at the beginning, I think people kind of find themselves just working off of a structure, whatever that's, originates as, and not necessarily being deliberate about thinking if that's the best structure for their goals, or if they should even just be thinking or working toward, something other than that. So, all right. So here's a good question for you. If I forced you to pick one, what would it be?
And I'm going to go the political way on this. Okay. I think it depends on where your organization is at. If as I said, if it's going to go to the point where you need to make a fast change, go develop something off to the side and then eventually integrate. If it's just about setting up operational, efficiency and discipline, if that's what's needed, then absolutely go to that. I would say though that in a majority of situations that I've come across, that, as I said, because customer service is absolutely at the heart of it, of your service organization, then being a part of a single commercial organization, I think would probably get the most top votes for this particular question. Because it is important that at the end of the day that your customer service be excellent, irrespective of what your end goal is. Starts and ends with that customer experience. And if the best way to provide that and to innovate for that is as part of commercial, then I think that's the way to go. But there's no right answer. There's no one answer. Yes, there are different people you can do. Yeah.
All right. That's fair enough. Okay. So let's just we touched on these, but let's just kind of revisit some of the key points of consideration for people. So knowing your end game, and you might not have 100% clarity on that, but at least having an idea of, strategically, what is the role of service in where you're headed, and how does that
and I think it's important to have some marketing functions, sort of dedicated to service. Because those are the guys that help you, put your strategy together, right? And where service strategy fits as part of the overall business strategy, I mean, it's just important to know, why we're doing this. So I do think that, again, knowing that end game, being deliberate and communicating it is just really important.
Yeah. We talked about gaining the trust and optimizing the experience of the customer. I think that's pretty clear. Culture. And, one of the things you just said is, in a lot of manufacturing industries that, have deep, rich history, it's also infiltrating service into the culture, right? So it's not just, this is something that happens after we've sold something and something breaks, but starting to really plant seeds even before you want to make any major changes on, here's why this is way more important than you may think, right?
Actually, to tell you the truth, I think one of the things that we will often say, and it goes on slides everywhere, I'm sure, in all companies. But one of the things that when it comes to service is a common theme, and that is a lot of the hurdles we face are internal. The hurdles we face are culture. So internal culture, which is the mindset of even the folks within your organization. Do they believe in what service can do? That has got to be a big one, and that actually helps you decide where that should reside. If the internal hurdle is high, the internal cultural hurdle is high, then you want your service organization to be front and center. You that message to be out there that this is important, and it's going to be part of whatever is the most central organization for that product. It may be operations and it may be commercial. But if you want to send that message that it's important, then you got to put it where it shines and not tucked away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's a struggle that everyone shares, that's really trying to make strides here. I think the one we haven't touched on is tying the field to R&D.
Yeah, and again, that one is, the reason I haven't brought it up so far, but it's a consideration, is that it just works differently in different companies.
Mm-hmm.
So, which of your groups has a better tie-in with R&D?
Mm-hmm.
Because the people on the field, the people, working, with the customers, they understand what the issues are, and they are the best form of input for future innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So again, in most cases, if that's going to be a field kind of organization, which is usually the commercial organization, the customer-facing organization, makes sense to also have service in there, because then you can tie it all back in together as one bolus of feedback over to R&D to be able to innovate in the future. But that's not to say that, people in operations don't have that tie into R&D. In fact, in several organizations, they have a better tie into R&D. Well, so I think that could go either way. It's just one consideration overall for providing better service is also to innovate using that service, field force.
Right. Okay. All right. So we've given a lot of advice. If you had to kind of summarize or give any final points on kind of weighing these decisions and carving a path forward, what would it be?
I guess I think more of just to summarize what we've touched upon already, which is that first of all, be deliberate. Do not let it be, sitting by the wayside. It's okay to not make a change, but it's not okay to not think about it. So be deliberate, and set your vision and goal. And that one step of, setting your vision and goal and then communicating it downward, it's just so important. Look at the life cycle, that where in the life cycle you are. Is it to establish a new service? Is it to operationalize? Is it to scale up service? Or is it to drive innovation and to, drive revenue and, or drive pull-through of your product? So I really think it's important to figure out what you're after and what role does service play in that overall vision and goal, and then communicate. So be deliberate, think through those things, have a vision and goal, communicate those. And then the last piece of it is, always have a timeline to revisit.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to make a decision today, but know that it's not forever, and that you need to evolve. Just because, again, service is unique, it doesn't always have an obvious answer as to where it belongs. And so be ready to make those changes as and when needed. But have a timeline, be deliberate, think about it, and communicate it.
The other thing you said earlier that I really like that I'm going to add for you is take calculated risks. I think that's an essential part of all of this mix right now, is to not just stick with the status quo, or not just make incremental improvements, but look for areas where you really are willing to
I give people this, I give my own team this example often, which is that, Domino's, and I forget the year or the decade in which this was, but probably in the 80s or 90s, I want to say, Domino's was kind of struggling a bit with their business. There was a lot of competition. Their pizza was good, but it really didn't set them apart from anyone else around at that point of time. And then they had this thought of, delivering within 30 minutes. Ordering. And that wasn't part of their product. It was a service. And it required innovation. It required thinking outside the box. It required being able to understand what the customer wants. Always think about that and tell people, well, that's how you need to be thinking. What is the equivalent of the 30-minute idea for us? What do you think we need to do to, really differentiate ourselves? And honest, that's one of the main things that Domino's has. Everyone in the world knows about its 30-minute promise or it's free. And so I think, we need to have that kind of innovation, and that kind of thought process. So yes, I think again, that's truly important to be able to think outside the box.
Good. The pizza box.
The pizza box. There you go.
Madhu, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. This has been great. And, the audience doesn't know this, but you and I have already landed on our second podcast topic. So I'll be asking you to come back and spend some more time with me sooner than later. But thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
You can check out more of our content by visiting thefutureoffieldservice.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn as well as Twitter at thefutureofs. The Future of Field Service podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more about IFS service management by visiting www.ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.